a moment to have everybody here since we've been closed for quite some time for the galleries. And tonight we have the great pleasure of having Peter here doing a poetry program with all of us. So before we start, I'm going to give an introduction of Peter. And this is also our first time trying Instagram live service. And in the following month, we're also going to do more programs online. So for everybody who's at home, stay tuned on our Facebook and Instagram channel. We're going to produce more content over there as well. This is a little bit dark here. Introducing Peter Sipeli. Peter has more than 2 decades of expertise in using and managing advocacy through artist expression. Peter has many titles and is very active in the literary arts scene. He's an arts manager and supporter of the Spokenword arts movement. He's the founder of the poetry shop Fiji that hosts regular poetry events in Suva and poetry art circles discussions with new and emerging Fijian writers. He also founded online arts magazine Art Talk Fiji that in 2017 ran 10 issues showing arts in Fiji and across the region. He's a gay activist using storytelling as advocacy. And Peter is very passionate about developing the literary arts in Fiji and addressing prolonged silence in the arts form. So tonight we are very thrilled to have Peter here, a parasite, to perform the second part of his poetry, The Sleeping Ancestors, that Peter has been writing for his father, centering around dreaming and creating poetic language around pulotu, the spiritual homeland of the peoples of the Pacific. Let's welcome Peter.
Take these recycled prayers, my friend. Take them in your trembling hands and push it back into the temple of your mouth. Grind these brittle verses against your tongue and feel its sharp claws press against that sacred teeth. You see, these prayers are not for us. These prayers are not tethered to this place. Its clawed fist shifts in cyclonic turmoil that never finds the shape of sleep. Spit it out into the sand and let the ceaseless tides take it back into the blue. Drag it across knifed coral edges and stretched wide between the waves. Send it back to shore with melodies sung in a wordless new song. Take off those uniforms. Unshirt your coated frame. Unlace your books and boots and place your awards and steel things at the teeth of the river. Bring yourself here, my friends. Your brown is true as your mother's promise, and your stride as proud as your father's backs, the backs that bent the winds. And those hands, the same hands that planted those first seeds, the same bodies that journeyed 1,000 liquid pathways across earth pregnant with the promise of harvests, of sons and of daughters, fluent in the language of birds and of trees, with the ocean in us, crashing against our bellies, and our blood inked with stories of us, and our gods etched into our fingernails, and sitting here in the kiss of our smiles. Bring yourself here. Us. You see, this blue ocean with its shape-shifting islands and its peninsulas sighing against the heaving belly of our sky. Earth's harvest of sleep and its violent dreams pressing against these mountains and plains, plateaus and sharp-toothed watery edges and heaving rivers bleeding into the limbs of our lands. Born inside the womb of this warm earth, birthed by rivers older than memory, once realized we knew its name. We know its rhythms and its corners. We know its leaf skin and the poetry of its language. It came tethered form and memory to these celestial parts that we carry in our bodies. Our histories of ancestries and genealogies, of songs and of stories, of voyages and discoveries untold in straight lines, sung in the language of brown earth, told in forgotten dialects of the old that lay here dormant in our new bodies. Within the circle of time, the past is before us because we know its landscapes, we know its borders. Our ways of knowing painted in our hands and marked on our tongues. We know its ghosts and we know the vast forests of its dead. And the future, behind us, a place of mystery, a place that is blessed with salted hope, a place without sound. And waves crash in circular motion, in cosmic rhythms and in resonating songs. And we We stand in the center, ever present. Our bodies that we carry are libraries, with our ancestors sleeping on our tongues and their spirits folded carefully in our bellies. Sacred roots. We know the poetry of treed skies, of places occupied where the voices of hoof beasts press against the chorus of winged creatures, where people swam on the fins of shark gods, where the curtain between our worlds was thin, when our bodies knew the music of brown earth, of roots leaking transmissions into rocks and pebbles and the surrounding bush, where the sacred root brought to us by spirits lay sleeping on the floor of forests, and books were bound on our tongues, sung from the libraries of our mothers' bellies, whose lullabies mark memory and lay sitting sadly on our skins. Storied songs in movement in the shape of sacred prayers carried on the insides of our mouths and marked in the cups of our hands. They tell us of the women that carried sacred root inside of their bodies, of the sacred child whose place of rest nurtured these first fruits, shown to her by the wisdom of rats. And from beast to man, we began to know the enchantment of these sacred roots that opened new pathways into dialects of dreams and of prophecies. Once our body knew its magic, it became part of our ways. It became central to our knowing. And these rooted vines that brought with it the call of other things from other places showed us new movement in the shape and sweep of clouded waves and crashing against the celestial skin of the night sky. And like the cords of our mothers and the broad shoulders of the four women, this brown potion from crushed roots push us over into the other side, into the well of dreams, into this other place. When we sit, we drink, and when we drink, we wait for a sounded feeling. Kava, Ava, Yangona, these are the names that we clothe it in. umbilical cord of the world stretches against space, time, uncoiled and like a hook, fishing, pulling us to the curtained shores of Pulotu, to people, to place and their stories, tethered to the origin of us and of all things, where the ancestors sit, and with them they hold the other half of our spirits, waiting, with knowledge from the cord center of our multiverse, where celestial currents push us inward, toward ourselves, towards the center. There, the gold of sunset is the light that guides each day. Red skies farewell gold light into night, where moons smile down from undressed clouds. Red palms sway on acres of red-sanded beaches, and the most beautiful maidens eating strange fruit and speaking in a coded dream language understood only by gods and those people caught in the space between. This place of wonder, where crops at the peak of harvest sour and can only be eaten when young and dry and green at the stalk, where fish roam freely on dry grounds and beasts roam the watery fields of red seas, and at its feet lie mirrored pathways to other places. It is here that we come to this altar to bring with us back into our world new lessons for our old, new crops and fruits for our bodies, and new fish to populate our ailing tides. Here, we look at gods in the eye and ask for the skin of the rainbow. It is here that we ask on scraped knee and on bent backs for the land to heal itself again, for the storms and the blaze of the night sky to return to the belly button there above us, for the illness of flesh to be washed back into that thin space between night and light, for our bodies to heal again, so we can learn again. It is here we can be whole again, between borders of form and of spirited realms, between cultures of the learned and earth's divine, between generations of those standing and the ones that have given their names back to the sky. That was it. Thank you. We thought that maybe we'd open it up for some kind of conversations and questions. If you had any, maybe what I should do is, talk a little bit about the work, and then we'd open it up. Yeah. I was very lucky enough to go to, where did we go? To Hin's place?
Hin's place.
Hin's place, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's in the territory.
Yeah. Nilong. And so it was there with our friends Tsubasa and his wife from Japan, artists also visiting. We went up to Hin's place along with Anchi, and I read the first part of the 3-part poetry series that I'm writing for my father. When my father died 2018, I realized that we were strangers. Like, I came out to my father at 17 and never looked at me again. And I think, I just lived my life in a certain kind of way. And I realized when he had passed away that I was a stranger to him and him to me. And I thought maybe a way to honor him and to fill that broken space was to do what I do, which is poetry. For me is healing and it's expressive, and I thought I would write 3 parts of poetry towards him. The first one is called Maps to the Ancestors, because I didn't have language, indigenous language. And when he died and his family came to the house and we were doing this indigenous funerary preparations, I had no idea what they were talking about, and I thought language are the maps to place and histories, and I didn't have that. And so I wrote the first part to him. This second part is about his world, which was a very indigenous one. And pulotu is, when you say pulotu in Fiji, P-O-L-U-T-I, T-O, people think it's the place where the devils live, because it's old knowledge. It was knowledge that was present before occupation by the British and then religion. And so now Fijians believe it to be like the dark place. And so I thought it was interesting because my father and his brothers and the family, when they'd gather, they'd always reference this place. And so I began to read about it, and I thought the sleeping ancestors would not only be about my father, it would also talk about ancestries that our ancestors aren't in another time, that we carry them, they're part of our bodies. And the idea of pulotu, the spiritual homeland, it's where our ancestors came from and where we go to. An idea of heaven, but it's this complex realms that has complex realms. And so I thought that maybe the work should be multi-layered and to elicit dreaming, like with visuals and chants. In Fijian, there's 2 forms of poetry: this form of chanting, and which is sung, and a spoken one called serkali. And so I thought I could use spoken word in this kind of way that weaves other forms into this kind of telling. And so that's kind of what this piece is about.
And what are you thinking for the 3rd piece?
Well, I've written the 3rd piece. So this piece was commissioned by an art magazine based out in London called After All. They commissioned this work, which made me take a chunk of time out, and I finished this and also finished the last piece. The last piece is called The Ascendant. I think in the Pacific, because of the way colonization happened, we forgot so much of our bodies and our histories. And so we spend a lot of time looking back and having this kind of, this sadness of what we've lost. And a lot of the work is trying to regain that lost culture. And I wanted to look forwards. I wanted to talk to the ancestors in the future. And I kept on looking for a name, and there were no full English names to describe the future ancestors. And I like the word ascendant. It's used in religious kind of texts. Like Jesus ascended into power. It means to rise. And so I thought I'd call the last piece The Ascendant, because I wanted to have conversations with the future me's that would be people of my genealogies. But also I think that your future ancestors are people that would also carry your same kind of ideas and politics and beliefs. I thought I wanted to think about it in that kind of way. But yeah, and I think I'm at the stage that I'm wondering, it's going to be a movement piece that's sung. I just need to find the people to work with to make that happen. But the text was completed last year. Yeah.
But in your family, who else do you sort of like look up to and aspire to? And do they still keep some of the traditions running and going?
Yeah.
Like
Well,
you talk about?
yeah. Well, you know, when at 17, when there was that dislocation, I just kind of went this way and, you know, pursued being a gay activist and was working in the literary movement. And I thought that culture and that world that he was from, I divorced myself from that world and just existed over here. So there wasn't really anybody, and I think I approached it from a very scholarly kind of way, like I did research and would talk to people in this very ordered way of gathering information. And I think, but I think maybe that's a good question, because I think the people that I look up to, the first wave of Pacific contemporary writers would be people like the late Sipeli, who was a great Pacific thinker, Konai Thaman, who still teaches at the university at the age 70. She was one of the first poets that began to write in a very Pacific, from a world view as an indigenous Pacific Islander. And so I was kind of using them as maps for me to write from. But for them, like, I didn't look back with so much sadness like they did in cultural loss, because I was very happy being this mixed person from mixed worlds. So yeah, maybe I used that first wave, which were Albert Wendt, Professor Sipeli, Konai Thaman. They were the first wave of contemporary Pacific writers, and I looked to them really, to what they were doing. But yeah, cultural knowing and understanding, I think I picked it up along the way, and there wasn't one person or group of people that I could, you know, draw from.
Peter,
Yes.
when and how did you find your voice?
Oh, that's a great, you know, I was incredibly lucky. And I think, like, being an artist is that you consistently mining in the creative field, like you're always working. And you only see at a certain point. So, you know, I was part of this very young group in the year 2000 that started advocating for equal rights for gay people and became the first activists. And I think it was through a series of doing things like that, and then, you know, setting up the poetry movement. I think it was inside of all those different kind of lives that, and reading also, and always reading, that I found this way of speaking. But I think when my father died, I always wrote poetry in a certain kind of way. When my father died, I shifted the way I approached poetry. I wanted to look at us in the Pacific as living in this small space within a timeline of a place. And I think that really shifted the way I write and think about the past and who I am in relation to that. You know, the role I play in this small time that I have here looking forward. But I think when my father died, it was that defining moment that I thought I was specific about what I wanted to write about. And yeah.
I'd like to ask you about this collaboration.
Yeah.
The way that you alternate between having this play and then you read. It feels to me like a call and response, and which is very much a genre that is about community.
Yeah.
Right? And I was also thinking about how you have started this project as a way to reconnect with your dad, but then it expanded as a project that's also about your relationship with your community. And can you talk a bit about this collaboration, how it came about? Because, you know, we can see the motifs running across.
Yeah. Again, like I think in the Pacific, like to give you a Pacific context, we don't come from the developed world like Australia, New Zealand, or Hong Kong, where there are grants, there's national bodies that you can draw money from to create work. There's none of that. So you have to hustle. And so I think it was 2 years ago, I had met TBA 21, that's an art academy out of Berlin that was coming to the Pacific to do some research work. we had met, and I had just finished Map to the Ancestors, and I read it to them, and when I had finished the text for this, I contacted them and said I was interested in expanding the work to include singing, indigenous singing and visuals, and they gave me a bunch of money to complete this. And then so, and again, the community is small, so I sat with the director of the Oceania Center for Arts, Culture and Pacific Studies at the University of the South Pacific, two graphic artists I work very closely with, this dancer whose name is Glenville Lord, who's based in New Zealand but does a lot of work back at home, small projects, about the project, and I read the text to them. And then we just spent like maybe a month meeting and talking about like what were visuals, what would that look like, what would be inside of the thing. And because it was about dreaming, you know, this whole piece is supposed to lull us into this dream. It came from that pool of people talking, and then the graphic artist and that team that did this knew the text and went away and did this in isolation alone. I was lucky with the singing. I wanted, because a lot of my work is translated into French, and it was, you know, very fancy and lovely, but I thought it should also be translated into Fijian, into the language. So I sent it to the Ministry of Indigenous Affairs, and then they called me in for a meeting, and they gifted me the singing parts, which was, it's almost like 8 minutes of song, and I asked them could they break it up to be interspersed in between the poetry, and that was a long conversation. They said, we don't do things like that, it's traditional, we sing it like this. And I thought, well, you know, I could easily just cut it up in the studio and not ask you, but I'd like your permission. And culture is this moving idea, it's not stuck in stone. And, you know, again, like, to understand colonized people is that they look at culture like a jam and must be preserved in a kind of way. And it was negotiation and getting them to understand. So then they re-sung it in this kind of smaller intervals, and then it was recorded. So it was a wonderful series of conversations and negotiations, and how was it going to be kind of performed, and this is only the third time I'm performing it. I only performed it twice at home. Because I don't know, it was hard. There wasn't much venues to hold it, and I really wanted to do it in this room because it's got all this fabric from my world, you know. So yeah, it was a conversation, and I think the most important part was when we were pulling it all together was it was like I didn't know, because I knew I wrote the script and everybody was part of this idea and dream, that we mapped it out together on one Friday night. It took us about 6 hours, and it fell into this form. So yeah. Yes.
In your poetry, you mentioned about multiverse. What is the multiverse to you, and what if your father is still here? What will you tell them?
Yeah. Well, you know, even the idea of pulotu, because it has so many different names across the Pacific. The same place is called Hawaii in Hawaii. It's called pulotu in several Pacific Island countries. It's called burotu in Fijian. And each country or place, space, they have their own interpretation and their own beliefs and stories about that place. And each one talk about this place that has different realms, and so there was a series of universes. And, you know, the reason I came here was to do research and find similar kinds of ideas within the people of Hong Kong, who were like the people that were here before the British colonized. And so I was asking those kinds of questions. So the multiverse for me was looking at this series of universes that were of the same place. The reason I make reference to the Hong Kong research is because I came around here asking this very bold question. So are the indigenous people of Hong Kong, do they have the similar kinds of ideas that we have in the Pacific? And every time I use the word indigenous, people are like, what is this word you're using? It's the wrong word. And then it fell into the story of the Ghost Festival, about going across, and when you die, before you cross the bridge, you drink a potion that makes you forget the living world, and you cross over. And I love that because so that's where I'm digging, and that's the place that I found a nice way to set the research within this kind of spiritual conversation, I think. So yeah, that's where the multiverse is from. Sorry, did I even answer your question? Cool. Maybe that's it. Yeah. Cool. So thank you all for coming. And the interns that helped me set up everything and create this space. Yeah. Thank you guys.